Up first is Dr. Kirk Howatt. He's our research teaching weed scientist, annual weed control and small grains and row crops.
Thanks, Joe. And as you know, I typically work a lot with small grains because Joe does a lot of work with the row crops. So a lot of my comments will be focused into the small grains area. And qualifier for the information that I will be giving, I tried to keep the slides a little bit cleaner, so I don't have a lot of rates, but for all of the products that I'm using, the typical field rate that is proposed by the tech reps from the companies was used. If you were around with me last year, you may remember this slide. I talked about Culex a little bit, relatively new product still. Flurazolam is included with the Culex, and we had noticed in a couple of trials that the pigweed control was not exceptional, and talked a little bit about the Culex weed spectrum and the fact that it is maybe a little bit more targeted to northern tier of our counties and then into Canada. But for our geography, it was not really catching the main weed pressure that we have. So we started taking a look at some of the other products that were coming out with haloxafen, which is the Arylex active, and we have it in Elevore, which is only allowed pre-plant burn down, but then we have it in the Culex, like I was mentioned showed on the last slide. Pixaro is a combination with fluroxapyr, and Wider Match is a wide match with the haloxafen. So we've got several products that are coming forward that have this haloxafen active ingredient in it. And because of what we were seeing last year, I wanted to take a closer look at how these combinations, as well as some other tank mix options, might be performing. And I just wanted to put this to recognize that, you know, the Culex that combination is working a lot better than Elevore for at least for the volunteer hemp work that we've been doing. That hemp is maybe a little bit more of a weed that we would see in northern geographies and some of the other weed spectrum that fits more of the Canadian weed pressure. So we take a look at this, and along the bottom we have several slides that are kind of set up the same way with product names along the bottom and percent control from 0 to 100 to give you the full spectrum of possibilities. And you can see already that we've got 3 weeds that will be listed on this. I'm going to take a look at each one individually because looking at all of it together a couple days ago when I was putting it together got a little bit confusing. So taking a look first off at Venice mallow, which is becoming a more difficult weed to control, we can see that even the Elevore or the haloxafen all by itself was providing 90% control. So very good activity on Venice mallow. And so with a lot of the other combinations, it might be hard to expect that it would do better. We do see a little bit of antagonism potential with that Culex here again, as well as with Pixaro, even Harmony, AIM, because of the inability of AIM to contact burn enough of the plant. We're seeing a little bit of antagonism there, but still everything is maintaining mid 80% control and above. With wild buckwheat, we saw definite drops in the combination with AIM, and there again, because AIM is not exceptionally strong on buckwheat, especially if the buckwheat is getting close to start vining. But even with 2,4-D and MCPA, that combination with haloxafen, we saw a negative aspect of that combination. With Harmony, and of course Harmony is very good on wild buckwheat, and you see very exceptional control. The Wider Match, which has the haloxafen in it, as well as clopyralid and fluroxapyr. The clopyralid there is helping with the buckwheat quite a bit. And then here we have another situation of common lamb's quarters where the Culex premix combination is giving us very poor control. alone, the haloxafen, the Elevore product, near 100% control. But when we have that sulfonyl or that flurazolam in there with it, there's a lot of antagonism happening. And the flurazolam is a very weak product for the common lamb's quarters. So we're just not maintaining the control level that we're going to want. Even though a lot of the other products, combinations were working very well. So when we look at all three of those weeds together, you can see that the haloxafen alone is maintaining 90% control or better of these three weed species. And so you might start thinking, well, why add it with anything else? So we know that haloxafen isn't the best product on every weed. So we will have to have combinations of it. And of course, Elevore at this point is not registered for use in the crop. We have several of these combinations, for instance, with the Harmony or the Wider Match as a product by itself, or the haloxafen with dicamba. We're working very well on this combination of weed set. Another newer product, we have Luxor A and B as a co-pack. Luxor A component is Express 50 SG. Of course, we've got tribenuron there at a rate of 0.21 ounce per acre, and then Luxor B being the Varo type product. You get the, didn't put the active ingredient there, sorry for you, thiacarbazone, if you're not familiar with the Varo, at that standard rate of 6.85 fluid ounces per acre. We were looking at this in a couple of different trials. In this one in particular, we were looking at additional products to improve Canada thistle control. We'll talk about Canada thistle in a little bit, but in this first slide, we have common lamb's quarters in green, wild buckwheat in red, and common ragweed in yellow. And you can see that Luxor A and B is exceptional on the lamb's quarters for control. Had a little bit of difficulty controlling wild buckwheat, and we really struggled on the common ragweed, probably because the area where we were doing this trial has ALS resistant ragweed in it, and so we wouldn't expect a product that contains 2 ALS inhibitors to do a very good job of controlling that common ragweed population. But we do have several of these combinations. We're providing very good control across the weed spectrum that was in the trial, especially because in small grains, we get the nice competition. So even weeds that early on were showing 60 to 70% suppression, essentially, plants were looking sick, but we get a little bit farther out and shading effect from the crop, and we get really good control over everything, reaching 90% control with many of the possibilities here. The Starane Flex in the second component there, the fluroxapyr is quite weak on common lamb's quarters, and as we were seeing from previous slides, the flurazolam component of Starane Flex is also weak on common lamb's quarters, but that's control is being picked up by the Luxor components, and then we were able to support the Luxor activity on wild buckwheat and common ragweed. So looking at the Canada thistle, now you see here we have 2 different bars, one for the green for 3 weeks after treatment, and the red is 7 weeks after treatment. And I was quite surprised, pleasantly surprised, I guess, only having the Luxor in there. We didn't know how much control to really expect out of the tribenuron, if there was going to be much support from the thiacarbazone. But as you can see there, at 3 weeks after treatment in green, all by itself, Luxor A and B was providing 80% control. Now we could get a little bit better control from pretty much any combination, anything that was providing additional broadleaf activity, but the Luxor was performing very good all by itself. And then as the season continued on at 7 weeks after treatment, that Luxor by itself was above 90% control. So we couldn't really expect many of the other products to improve on that control. But those other products would fill in gaps in the weed control spectrum of Luxor A and B. Another thing, we did have a little bit of essentially one rep within the trial had sow thistle in it as well. And fortunately, the Luxor A and B seemed to be working about as good on that south thistle population as it was on the Canada thistle. So we'll be trying to find some areas where we can actually test that out next year, see if we can confirm that. But for a weed that we really don't have a lot of anything that will do a very good job, this is providing a good possibility at least. Husky FX hit the market a few months ago. It's Husky, I think everybody's probably familiar with that, with the pyrosulfatol and bromoxynil. And then the FX, they've added the fluroxapyr. Use rate is from 13.5 to 18 fluid ounces per acre, which gives a similar Husky rate similar to the Husky rate range of 11 to 15 ounces, and then get the additional fluroxapyr in there. And of course, why are they wanting more of the fluroxapyr? Primarily for kochia. And so we'll show you a little bit of kochia information, but I had confirmed with the company, and they are going to be they're going to be promoting the 15.5 fluid ounce rate as their kind of their standard. But I'd say if you're on kochia, you need to be up close to that 18 fluid ounces, because at that 15.5 fluid ounces, it's only about 1.2 ounces of fluroxapyr. And even at 18 fluid ounces, it's not quite 1.5 ounces of fluroxapyr, which would be our standard wide match fluroxapyr rate. So if you're trying to control kochia, we want to make sure that you are on the higher end of that use rate. It can be applied up to flag leaf emergence. All the products are quite safe for wheat. They still have the carryover issues, so 9 months to most crops. We want the weeds to be small still, even though with that added fluroxapyr, we typically think of being able to control larger kochia. Because of the burning activity of the Husky components, we want to make sure that we're not letting that kochia get too large to get the benefit out of the Husky. We want to have all three products in a size range of the weed where we can expect good control. So looking at water hemp in green and common lamb's quarters in red for Husky, the FX at the 15.5 ounce rate, as well as the 18 ounce rate in the first pair of bars, and then comparing to several industry standards, things that have been using in the past. You can see that 15.5 ounces of Husky FX performed exceptionally well, above 95% control. So you get that little extra up to the 18 ounce rate is really not able to help us statistically. We are seeing a little bit of an improved sharpness in control. Wide match and MCPA is relatively slow acting products. So we see a little bit lower control earlier in the season, and it takes about a month and a half for that wide match plus MCPA to catch up to the Husky FX as far as control rating. Talonor, because it's similar to Husky, very, very quick, very fast activity, a little bit less control on the lamb's quarters, but in general, the Talonor and Husky standalone product has been quite similar for us in the past. So with the water hemp, we struggled with bison because neither of those products are exceptionally strong on pigweed species. The carnivore has bromoxynil in it, so we improve the control there again. And then the weld looking fairly similar to the wide match plus MCPA because they're the same active ingredients, just a little bit different ratio. Looking at two other weeds then, wild buckwheat and Venice mallow. That wide match and MCPA struggled a little bit on the Venice mallow, more so than the weld. Other products were up near 90% control across the board, and that wild buckwheat activity out of the Husky FX especially was very exceptional. The Venice mallow tends to be a little bit harder to control, and I like to see tribenuron in a tank mix because that will not only help with the weeds that are present, but gives us a little bit of residual for that early season second flush of Venice mallow to keep it out of the crop. Looking at kochia specifically then, pulling this across 3 different evaluation dates from 7 days at green, 14 days in red, 35 days in yellow. And you can see with the Husky FX, it's always just a little bit behind kochia control from that Husky FX 18-ounce rate. So that's why I was saying, if we want to try to kill the kochia, and granted, we were going after larger kochia here, 4 to 6 inch target instead of 2 to 4 inch target. But if you have kochia problem, we want to make sure that we're maintaining that Husky FX rate high enough to where we can expect to keep that plant from producing seed and developing resistance. Comparing to the other industry standards, so to speak, within this trial, that Husky FX at that 18-ounce rate is definitely performing better, especially against bison, which again, when you get larger kochia, that bromoxynil and MCPA starts to lose control, and it doesn't hold the plants from producing new shoots. So here, comparison with the 15.5 ounce versus 18 fluid ounce rate of Husky FX, you can see on the left side, we've burnt off a lot of the top growth on these plants that were 6 inches tall, but the base of the plant, there's a lot of vegetation there, and over the course of the season, that continued to grow and eventually started popping out the top of the barley canopy. Whereas on the right side, a month after application, those plants are essentially gone. There's not much color left in the base of the stem there at all, and none of those plants recovered and were able to produce any shoots that had seed on them. Bison, I mentioned, there again also not very exceptional control long term on large kochia, burnt off the top, and plants were able to recover. The wide match or weld, where we've got that little bit higher rate of fluroxapyr, just causes the plants to twist up and sit there for about a month or a month and a half before some of the plants might start to put out new shoots. And then the Talinor, if we catch the kochia small enough, again, an exceptional product, but on plants that are 4 inches tall or a little bit more, we burn off the top half of the plant and we end up with new shoots from the base of the plant, where you can see there's green down in that canopy still. So switching gears a little bit to grass control, we got wild oat control with axial tank mixes. Looking for the potential for antagonism with some of the products that are available on the market. Of course, green is wild oat there, and you can see wild buckwheat in red. All alone, that axial bold is providing very exceptional control of not only wild oat, but green and yellow foxtail. And it's a fairly good all-around annual grass product for us. On the wild buckwheat, on the wild buckwheat, you can see that Orion is not a very strong competitor as far as controlling that buckwheat. Neither of those products are exceptional for our geography. We end up with no antagonism though. And then we go to Talinor combinations. We have very good activity on the buckwheat, but very poor activity, very poor control of the wild oat because of antagonism that showed up. Looking at across the options then, grass antagonism, I want to point out, remind you that last year we talked about this, 2,4-D is an antagonist of Assure 2 activity, as well as the other grass herbicides that we're using in soybean and now sometimes in corn. If we split that application, you get very good activity on barley, oat, and corn. If you tank mix them, even if you're using the high rate of 12 ounces of Assure 2, we end up with substantial inactivity or antagonism there. So just a picture showing Assure 2 1 day before Enlist 1. If we put those in the tank mix though, we got a lot of the barley and oat that is surviving. So I don't see that we've had any questions come up along the way, so I guess we can move on to the next individual.